Okay, so not too long ago I made a video of my Tamiya TA02, and it had that Dodge Ram truck body and the HPI molded carbon fiber chassis and all these nice aluminum parts and everything, and also these shocks in the front, although with different shock caps. And it was kind of cool, and the biggest problem that I had with it were actually two things. First was getting modern batteries into the chassis, because that molded chassis was just too small to fit larger modern batteries. They can only fit sort of older 2 amp hour NiCads. And the steering setup on that chassis was very flexible, very wobbly. There was a lot of steering slop, and I had tried getting aluminum steering components for that chassis, but the problem was since the original TA02 and TA01 have this sort of straight piece in the bell crank here, and that chassis had an L-shaped piece. There was no L-shaped piece made specifically for the TA02 other than what was made for that HPI molded chassis. So I tried getting like a TA05 sort of L-shaped piece, but the position of the hole that mounts the linkage between this bell crank and the one on the other side was too far forward, and so that was hitting up against the linkage in here was running up against the gearbox. So I couldn't really get the steering to work right. So in order to fix the steering and make it more solid, I basically had to get a different chassis. So if you look online or on eBay, for whenever they do show up for the TA02 FRP chassis kit, those things have sold for around $300, which is kind of ridiculous. So I figured I could maybe build it using parts, and I could do it for a lot less money. So the cool thing about these older chassis, the TA01, the TA02, and the DF01, also known as the Top Force, is they all shared the exact same gearboxes. The front and rear gearbox are exactly the same. The only differences are in the size of the suspension arms. The Manta Ray and the Top Force had longer suspension arms, but the C hubs and the steering knuckles and the hub carriers all exactly the same. So there's a lot of intercompatibility between the parts. So I figured what I'd do is try to convert this chassis into a Top Force chassis, because there's more availability for the Top Force chassis pieces than there are for the TA02 chassis pieces, at least as far as I've been able to find. So I got off of eBay FRP upper and lower decks from a Tamiya Top Force. And then the only trick was trying to figure out how to mount the gearboxes, because even for the TA02 you can get carbon fiber upper and lower decks, but they don't come with the mounting posts, and it's extremely hard to find the mounting post for either the Top Force or the TA02 aftermarket upper and lower deck units. So what I did is I ordered the mount bag off of eBay, once again, from another Tamiya chassis. I forget the exact name, but it came from a chassis that Tamiya had in the mid-90s. It was a gas-powered 10th scale truck, stadium truck, and it had mounting posts that were similar in size to what the Top Force had used. Ironically enough, after I had gotten these, I saw that someone was actually carrying a mount bag for the Top Force, so I ordered those. Those will be in some period of time, and I'll replace some of these mount posts with that. The other thing to get are the Top Force J parts. It's just a parts tree, and that has all the stuff you need to complete the mounting of the front and rear gearboxes, plus the battery mount. And that's it. You just need the plates, the J parts, and some kind of mounting post. And if you can't get the exact Tamiya components, maybe if you have access to like a lathe or something, you may be able to fabricate some of your own. So what I did for the front here is, luckily enough, within the mount bag that I had, one pair of posts were just the right size to mount the front gearbox, provided that I basically cut a hole out of this front plastic unit in the J parts bag. Maybe hard to see that plastic unit, but I assure you it is in there. And it's basically like a plastic spacer on the bottom, such that you get the bottom of this gearbox. You can kind of see it there where my thumb is. there's a space between the bottom of the FRP chassis and where the gearbox mounts on the bottom. That's a little black plastic piece that mounts the gearbox, or helps to mount the gearbox to the front of the chassis here. So these posts were a little bit too tall, so I just had to cut a hole in the part where these posts would otherwise sit to offset the spacing there. If I had the top force mount bag, of course I wouldn't have to do that. But the J parts are actually not that difficult to find on eBay. There are plenty of people that carry them. So if I need to get a replacement one, it's not a big deal. And then there's a little plastic piece here from the J parts bag. And then these two screws here for the upper deck, these are actually some very long, I think 15 or 20 millimeter screws. They just go right into these two posts here. And then on the rear, this was a little bit trickier because you have, well, on the rear here, there's another plastic bit here from the J parts tree that goes between the gearbox and the chassis plate. That's pretty easy to put together. But to mount the rear gearbox, these posts here are not quite tall enough to go from the chassis up to where they would fit in the front of the rear gearbox here. So I had to whip my Dremel out and basically cut off this upper lip here around the top, as these two posts are these two guys, 4 of these came in the bag. So it would fit actually inside this black plastic piece that's in the J parts bag, because with this lip on here, they wouldn't fit in. And so I did that, and I was somehow able to get that to mount to this gearbox, but I had to add like another little spacer in there just from some random parts I had lying around. And then from this bit to the upper deck here, in principle, if everything mounts correctly, there should be no spacer here. This upper deck will mount directly onto this plastic piece. But because I had to use some non-top force parts, the sizes are different, I just had to find some random spacers I had in my toolbox and add that space there to mount this bit. So the problem here is that because this post is shorter than I would need, this plastic bit sits a little shorter, which means the thickness of the battery pack I can put in is going to be limited by the position of this guy. So when my top force mount bag comes in, I'm going to replace this rear post with the proper rear post. Should push this whole thing up a bit, and I could fix this rear assembly. But if you're not too concerned about that, because maybe you're going to be running a saddle pack, and you don't need to worry about fitting batteries directly under that part there, then you can get away with doing something like this. So I was at least able to successfully get the upper and lower deck on here without directly using the top force mount bag. I just used a different mount bag and dremeled off a couple bits to make everything work. Let's see. I did notice that the top force does have a longer wheelbase than the TA02. So the blue drive shaft, aluminum drive shaft that I had here, and you may have seen it in the previous video, doesn't fit. It only goes from the front out to about here or so. So I had to order another unit from Yeah Racing for the TA01, which has the same wheelbase as this guy. So hopefully that'll fit. Everything will be fine. I did happily find also on eBay universal drive shafts for the top force, which is great. So now these are no longer dog bones, they're universal drive shafts. I think they're made by GPM. I got them from RC Damper, so they don't say GPM, and all their like aluminum components that they sell don't say GPM, but I'm pretty sure they're GPM components, or they look a lot like them. What else? I got some HPI metal hex mounts here, same things that I put on my Avante. These work very nicely. I talked about them in one of the Avante videos. Very happy with them. Surely beats using the red plastic units that can break. I ordered aluminum rear hub carriers, so I'll mount those when those come in. What else? As you can tell, this is not completely finished. The battery mount comes from the J parts tree, so there's this sort of U shape here that goes on this side that you screw in, and then on the other side there would be another U shape. But for now, I just took 2 of the remaining aluminum battery posts from the other mount bag and just mounted them here. It should make it easier to slide a battery in from the side, and I just got to figure out a way to screw something in from the top to sort of close this off once the battery is mounted. Let's see, I did get a stainless steel screw set from RC Screws. This is for the TA02. Very nice screws. You actually get way more than you need. Most of this is put together with these screws, and I still have a whole bunch of them left over, a couple spacers and lock nuts and everything. So it's a very nice set. Plenty of spare screws if you need them. I also, because the bottom of the chassis here has these sort of indented bits here so that the shape of the screw head is tapered, to make that flush, I couldn't use any screws from this set because all of these screws here don't have any tapered screw heads. They're all just kind of like that. They're flat, and then they're sort of round, flat on this side, and then sort of rounded at the top. So to get a nice, true flush fit here, I had some extra screws from the Hex Heads screw set that I got for my Avante Black Special. I had plenty left over to use for this part of the build here, so that works fine, except for these two here. I had to use the normal screws for that. What else did I do? I am using gear differentials front and rear, only because this chassis doesn't have a slipper clutch and there's no way to really put one in here. So I used to run ball diffs a long time ago and they just kept slipping. So gear diffs are more reliable. You don't need to really maintain them at all. Works great for chassis like this that don't have a slipper clutch. And the way the gear diff is assembled, you can add some diff oil in there. So I put 5,000 weight oil in the front and rear. We'll see how long that lasts because that differential housing is not perfectly sealed. So, you may have to just go in every once in a while and refill the housing. But that's what's in there. I got a bunch of other parts that I'm just waiting in the mail on. I got the Tamiya aeration oil-filled buggy damper set. I'm going to mount those on this guy, which means that I'll need new shock towers. So these shock towers are the FRP units for the top force. So this is effectively a full top force conversion here. So I'll do that. I also ordered a top force body and wing and under cowl to protect the bottom of this chassis. If you try to order an original body and under cowl, they're very expensive. But there is this company, I think BPM, something like that, or BMP, something like that. They're based in Canada, and they make replica versions of the top force body and under cowl, and you can get those real cheap, about 20 bucks or so. Same as you would spend for a Proline body or something like that. So I look forward to doing that. The only other thing I would point out is there is a company called Fiberlyte, Fibrelyte, and they do manufacture for several chassis, but the top force included, front and rear shock towers and upper and lower decks in carbon fiber. So maybe one day I'll order those if I find that, these FRP units aren't really for me. But I figured I'd just show this in its present build status. I am basically completely overhauling my TA02, going to effectively turn it into a top force. I got some nice bling HPI chrome 5-star rims for this. So I expect this thing to look really hot when it's done. I'll surely make another video when that has been completed. So that's it for now.